Hello, welcome back to my channel and part 3 of my Lewton retrospective. And today I'm talking about the big one, Cat People. This is a film that I would say is a landmark in the horror genre. It kind of moves it forward. I'd say it's almost the Citizen Kane of horror films. Now that's rather a heavy burden to place on such a slight film. It's barely 75 minutes long and it has such a simple storyline about a young woman living in New York. She meets a guy, but she's frightened to have sex with him because she thinks it will turn her into a great big panther and she'll kill him. That's the storyline. And I'm saying that this is one of the major horror films of all time. Now, why? Well, first of all, because it can lay claim to being the first modern horror film. With Cat People, we leave behind that sort of European Gothic world of castles and Dracula and Frankenstein, and we move into the modern world. The whole film is set in New York. It's set in the world of subways and taxis. It's set in the world of late-night diners, with cleaners and office politics. In the marriage scene in the film, the boss turns to one of his colleagues and says, "What do you think of his bride? She's a bit odd, isn't she?" This is the world of Cat People. It's our world. It's not some world of ancient aristocracy and counts and countesses. It's the world we live in. That's the first point. But the second point is that Cat People brings in a new literary intelligence. It's a world of metaphor and symbolism, not monsters walking around like this. But, well, as evidence, the film opens with a literary quotation. "Even as fog continues to lie in the valleys, so does ancient sin cling to the low places, the depressions in the world consciousness." Quite a quote to open a film. And it will end with a quote from John Donne. Seconds after that quotation, there's another. Irina, who's the heroine of the film, she's sketching a panther in a zoo. She's unhappy with the drawing, she crumples it up, she throws it towards a bin. She misses. Kent Smith, who'll become the hero of the film, picks it up and he points at a sign. The sign says, "Let no one say, and say it to your shame, that all was beauty here until you came." And of course that's resonant with all sorts of meaning, as we will see in the film. They come up, they have a little chat, then she throws away another drawing. We see this blown by the wind, and it's a metaphorical drawing. It's not a straightforward drawing of the panther, it's the panther with a sword driven through its belly. So within the space of about 3 minutes of the film starting, we're in the world of metaphor. We're in a world that has a literary intelligence as well as a visual intelligence. This is a huge step forward in sophistication for the mainstream horror movie. Let's go back to those quotations. That first quotation about fog continuing to lie in the valleys, ancient sin clinging to the low places. Does that remind you of anything? It should do. It should remind you of what we said about Isle of the Dead. In Isle of the Dead, you'll remember, Boris Karloff's Greek character and all the Greek characters carried this kind of legacy of ancient superstition that they were almost trapped by. In this film, a Serbian immigrant into America feels trapped by the legends of her village, where people practiced witchcraft and Satanism and were turned into cat people, people who, whenever they were aroused, became vicious animals. And she believes that she is going to become one of these animals. And this new, young American chap is going to try and talk her out of it, saying, no, you've got to get rid of that old ways, that old way of thinking, and become a new modern person. You know, he actually uses the lines, he says, "In America, when two people fall in love," that's what he says, "we kiss." But she can't do that. Again, there seems to be, Lewton, who was a Russian immigrant into America, seems to be haunted by this idea of carrying the old world with him across the ocean. And don't forget, Jacques Tourneur was also a Frenchman. That they're sort of carrying these old tales with them like a sort of disease, like a trap, a psychological trap. And this young American is trying to break her free of it. And once again in Isle of the Dead, we see how, in some ways, that superstition of the old European ways has to be exorcised so that the new young couple, American, can move forward. That's what happens in Cat People as well. It's kind of it sort of haunts me because that line about, just above the waste paper bin, let no one say, and say it to your shame, that all was beauty here until you came. That line takes on an extra hauntiness, an extra pain, when you consider that in some ways it's almost as though Lewton and Turner are playing with this idea of the immigrant brings some kind of pain with them, some kind of shadows with them that they have to get rid of. And is it a coincidence, for example, later in the film, that the only person who can really come to understand Irena and believe her story is played by an Englishman with an English accent, another European? There's also the use of repeated symbolism. The various ways of the sword and the key are matched in her imagination and her unconscious. And there's also the darker undercurrents of this symbolism, the way that Eros and Thanatos are brought together in this one woman, Irena. Because her drive, if she's going to have sex, she will kill. And the only way to exercise that is to be killed herself. So at the end, the key unleashes the male panther. And so the consummation of the sort of male panther and the female panther is her death. That kind of sophistication of ideas and symbolism is something very new in American horror cinema. There's another aspect of this film which I think moves it forward. The film is about the monster, but it's on the monster's side. Irena is the central character. We're drawn into her world, into her pain, into her psychology. And she's a tragic figure. We feel sorry for her. And what's more, she's a woman. And this is an interesting film. Up until this point, women are largely the figures of, they're afraid of the monsters, they're running from the monsters and screaming and have to be saved. Suddenly, this is a film about two women, two very modern women, working women. And it's about their psychology. And it's particularly about their psychology to do with sex. Now, there's a very interesting scene right at the centre of this film. I said at the start of this video that this is a modern film set in a modern world. It even has a water cooler moment. Kent Smith and Jane Randolph, who play the young American couple in the film, they stand by a water cooler exchanging, a little chat about their lives. And it's an extraordinary scene. For me, it's a simple, you might say it's a simple character scene, but it moves the horror film forward a quantum leap. What are they talking about? He says, look, I'm unhappy. It's two work colleagues talking about marriage. What could be more modern than that, right? And he's saying, look, before I met Irena, I was happy. I was a happy young man. I knew where I was in life. And then I met Irena. And this leads into her saying, this paean to what love is, according to the modern world, according to America, this wholesome idea of it's us versus everyone else, and it's just good, and it embodies all the good things about bringing two people together. And he replies, yes, but my love for Irena is different. I'm drawn to her in a way I can't help. It's obsessive, it's infatuation, it's lust, it's sex. And there's this kind of dichotomy built up between the wholesomeness of modern American life, its freshness, its truth, we can just talk to each other as buddies, as friends, and then this darker, more intense, perversion that you can't understand that drives you towards someone else. That is such a huge moment in the horror film. We're breaking away from just the old monster coming out of the graveyard. We're trying to psychoanalyze what it is. We're trying to psychoanalyze, first of all, what it is to be drawn to the sort of darker part of ourselves. And later in the film, Irena will visit a psychiatrist where she will try to understand her inner self. Irena will try to investigate her own dark subconscious. So in that sense, it's a very modern film. Let's talk about the actors here for a moment. Simone Simon, brilliantly cast as Irena. You couldn't have got more perfect casting. She even looks a little bit cat-like. She's very cute and feline. I think Kent Smith is a bit of a dolt. He kind of always got dolt parts, Kent Smith. With a name like that, he should have played Superman, shouldn't he? And he looks a bit like Superman. He's also in This Land Is Mine by Jean Renoir, playing a very similar role. Tom Conway is brilliant as the psychiatrist. He's, of course, George Sanders' older brother. And he's wonderfully oily and suave and sophisticated. But the person we really should talk about here is Jane Randolph. Because Jane Randolph in this film, she's Kent Smith's buddy, later partner, and she represents the modern woman. And really the whole film is the battle between these two women. So it's an interesting film for feminists because really they're the key figures. And Randolph, watching the film again, I'd forgotten how good she is and how important she is to the film's success. She plays that part really well. And what struck me about this, and DeWitt Bodine's brilliant, very literary, very clever and witty script, it struck me that Jane Randolph is in some ways a character who's transferred from that other popular genre at the time, screwball comedy. Think about that. Look at the way, Jacques Tourneur introduces the character of the cleaner in the office, the ship's architect office. And she has this little bit of business where she keeps flicking stuff off her coat. These are characters from screwball comedy. The modern woman that we found in screwball comedy, played by Irene Dunne or whoever, has transferred over into the horror film. The horror film is growing up, right? And I think that's a very important joy of this film. The other great joy of this film, we've got to talk about the cinematography by Nicholas Musuraca. Oh, it's so beautiful. Now, of course, it anticipates film noir with heavy shadows on the wall, chiaroscuro, pools of white in darkness, and Jacques Tourneur and Musuraca play with all sorts of wonderful effects. Look at that scene where the young couple are attacked by the big cat in an architect's office with only light tables lighting up the room. Wonderful stuff. But it anticipates noir, and of course it is influenced by German Expressionism, but I don't think that those two labels really get close to how it affects you. It's a silkier touch, a more poetic touch. There's a wonderful line of dialogue in the film right at the beginning where Irena says, "I like the dark, it's friendly." And that line of dialogue to me is the tone, it's the register for the whole lighting effect that Musuraca and Tourneur come up with. I don't call it film noir, I call it film velvet. I think it's kind of soft to the touch, And I like the way that it sort of almost caresses and protects Irena in those dark scenes, particularly at the beginning with Kent Smith in her apartment. And we should also mention that fantastic transformation scene when the oily psychiatrist played by Tom Conway gets her in her apartment and kisses her. And there's a wonderful cut to Simone Simon's face, and she seems to move forward slightly, and light seems to sparkle in her eyes, and the darkness comes in. A brilliant effect from Musuraca with excellent direction by Tourneur. A wonderful shot. What else can I say about this film? Ah, yes. The two major horror sequences. Again, in the modernisation of this film, one is set at a bus stop, one is set at a swimming pool. And they are two of the best horror scenes in the history of film. The first one, watching it again, I got the goosebumps on my neck all over again. It's that famous scene where, Jane Randolph's character is walking to the bus through the underpass and Irena follows her. And it's an absolute masterpiece of editing and sound editing. So that, walking through pools of light. So she's walking quickly at night, clack, clack, clack of the high heels, and then Irena follows her with clack, 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 clack of the high heels. That brilliant use of sound. It's so simple but so clever. And then, Jane Randolph begins to feel that there's someone behind her, and you look back and there's that eerie shot under the underpass. And then she starts to walk quickly, and she hears the growl, and bang! The growl straight goes into the hiss of the bus as it stops by her. The sound editing for its time is magnificent. And it's such a shock that actually that scene gave its name to that type of effect in the horror film. It's called a bus. That's what it's called, a bus scene. From that scene, and all these years later it still works. My favourite bus scenes, apart from this one, are in Toby Hooper's Salem's Lot. The one where the two boys are in the graveyard and that bloke just suddenly rises up, that gets me every time. And then that fantastic scene, I don't know if you remember it, where there's the couple, there's a wife who's having it off with this other guy, and the husband comes back with a shotgun and threatens them, and there's this wonderful scene. It's a brilliant piece of misdirection. You're sort of involved in the soap opera of this couple, and the guy, the lover, runs out, and suddenly, bang, the vampire's there. That scene gets me every time. The best bus in movies. But this is the scene that gave us that name. Also, watch out for the end of the sequence. Fans of The Incredible Hulk, the 1970s Incredible Hulk series, will love this. I love the fact that you see the paw prints of the cat change into high heels. She instantly changes back to having high heels and a fur coat on. That's good, isn't it? You know, her clothes don't tear like Bill Bixby's used to, you know. She gets her clothes back, and they're all really nice. They've got a few mud spatters on them, though. I like that. And then later we have that fantastic scene in the swimming pool. I mean, what a modern, brilliant idea that is. A woman sort of just floating in the pool with the shadows of the pool around her, and there's something in the shadows. It gave loads of critics for years the idea that monsters are best kept in the shadows because it's such an effective scene, which I slightly regret because sometimes I like seeing the monster. But what a beautiful, poetic, modern, strange, original scene that is. So in the end, Irena sacrifices herself so that the young, fresh American couple can go forward into the 20th century. Interesting to look back at Isle of the Dead, where the superstitions and fears of the Greek characters turn out to be groundless, whereas in this film, they're real. She really is a cat person. That's an interesting and ironic twist to this film. I hope I've shown why this film is so special to me and why I think it's such an important film in the horror cycle. I almost feel like it's a special friend, almost a close cousin, like that strange woman who comes up to Irena at her engagement party and says, Moja sestra? This film is Moja sestra.